Well, thank you. Thank you very much. It's great to be with you today, Dick. And Paul, thank you for that very kind introduction. And thanks to you and Dick Clark for not only the invitation to be here today, but for supporting my affiliation with the Middle East Institute. I've really enjoyed my association with the Middle East Institute, first because it's providing me an opportunity to stay engaged with a region in which I've served for a long time and to stay associated with the people that I've come to respect and love through my own service. And secondly, because it is now allowing me to expand my own horizons about opportunities in this culturally rich, historically important, deeply troubled, but always hopeful area. I think we all saw this on display last evening with the tribute that the Institute paid to Othman and Layla Benjaloum for their extraordinary philanthropy dedicated to educational and economic development for the children of Morocco. And of course, by Nadine Labaki in her efforts to bring to life, through the magic of film, the plight of the disenfranchised and marginalized men, women, and especially children of Beirut. Her comments last evening about the current plight of the Lebanese as they fight for their own voices spoke louder than any words I could ever articulate about the hope and opportunity that remains in this region. It was truly an inspiring evening, and I wish more Americans had had the opportunity to witness it. Now, frankly, when I met Paul last July after coming on board with MEI, I asked him what he thought my first contribution could be. And he suggested an op-ed. And I internally cringed a little bit, and I admit that I was a little bit uncomfortable with this, but I finally thought that perhaps I could write something on my reflections as a former combatant commander. Little did I know at the time that future events would provide me several opportunities to write. And in doing this, I was fortunate to be able to link with two excellent MEI colleagues to support this writing. Still, I was a bit nervous about this because there is, in fact, a tradition in military circles, particularly among senior officers, that when you are retired, be retired. In this case, I felt particularly strongly about a topic for which I had a lot of personal knowledge and experience, and which I had talked publicly about while in uniform. I also felt that we could communicate in a way that stayed focused on policy analysis, did not get into personality discussions or attacks, and which would not make things harder for those on the ground charged with implementing our policies. I want to publicly pass my thanks to Ganul Toll and Liz Dent, my co-authors who worked with me through this process. They were great partners, and they are real assets to the Middle East Institute. These small examples, in conjunction with what we witnessed last evening, demonstrates the power of this organization to enter into the public discourse in a respectful and informative way and help expose not only the issues, the pressing issues of the region, but also expose the goodness and the hope of this region for the American public. I'm very proud of my affiliation with MEI, and I'm so glad to be talking with you this morning. My time is relatively short today, so I want to move right into the topic that I have been asked to comment on this morning, U.S. priorities for the Middle East region. Before I begin, let me start with a few general health warnings here. First, we are covering some very complex issues in a short period of time, and I recognize that more analysis and discussion is necessary to flesh out the ideas that I will share with you today. Hopefully, this can be partially accomplished in the panels that follow today. Second, I'm an infantryman and a ranger. I view things as a practitioner and through the lens of execution on the ground. Third, I'm a victim of my own experience, and I tend to look at the region through my own experiences, especially those of the last 18 years. I am retired, and therefore I am a refugee from accountability, but nearly and also 9 months away from the best situational awareness and understanding that I ever had on this region. Most of my comments this morning will be about our approach in the military security area. I am mindful that the military is often not the lead, and that our efforts must not only be in conjunction with the other elements of power, but actually always in a supporting role. And I'm also mindful that as we meet and discuss here today, There are military commanders and young American men and women in harm's way doing their best in our nation's bidding. These comments are certainly not a criticism of them. Today, the region is as complex as it has ever been. All of the underlying issues which have undermined progress remain present: sectarianism, corruption, disenfranchisement, economic disparity, terrorism, and extraordinary human suffering. But these long-standing issues are now being exacerbated by super-modern communications capability and a more youthful and anxious population that serve to amplify the challenges of the region. Add to this new conflict, as we see between Turkey and the Kurds in Syria, increasing instances of civil unrest against corrupt or ineffective governments, as we are seeing in Lebanon and Iraq, increasing instances of Iranian-sponsored proxy war across the region, as we see in Yemen, Syria, and Iraq, great power competition between China, Russia, and the United States, unresolved conflicts in Syria, Yemen, and Afghanistan, and fatigue on the parts of many of the countries, including ours, I would add, who have been engaged in this region for a long time. The region is on edge, and in fact, I assess it to be a tinderbox with very few clear paths to stability or de-escalation. So let me begin my remarks this morning by discussing one big overarching idea, and then I will get into more specifics about several of the current ongoing operations and events that we are currently observing in this vitally important area. My takeaway for you this morning is that the best path to stability is to relentlessly pursue clarity in our interests and objectives. I believe this is the best thing we can do to de-escalate tension, preserve our interests, pursue our interests in the region, and best support our overall global national security strategy. First and foremost, as a priority, I think we have to review, renew, and more clearly articulate our interests and priorities in this region. Only then can we begin to devise an effective regional strategy that can be integrated with our national interests around the globe and which can be effectively implemented by those who do our bidding on a day-to-day basis. When people ask me why we care about this area, I usually try to discuss our interests in 5 ways. First, we must ensure countries, areas, and populations in the region can't be used as platforms for attacks against our homeland, our citizens, or those of our friends and allies. After all, this is the reason we went to Afghanistan. Secondly, we have to prevent proliferation of weapons of mass destruction. I think we can all agree that competition between states who possess these types of weapons is not healthy for the region. And certainly, I think we can agree that if these weapons fell into the hands of organizations like ISIS, there can be no doubt they would be used against us. Third, we must deter and contain adversarial influence and activities that further destabilize the region and prevent them from spilling out and affecting our interests in other regions. Everyone can think back to the period of 2011 or 2012 when we saw the heartbreaking images of refugees fleeing Syria and the impact that that had not only in our country but certainly in Western Europe and other countries in the region. Fourth, we must protect freedom of navigation and flow of commerce through the region. 50% of the oil and gas reserves of the world reside here. 25% of the daily global commerce passes through one of the 3 key straits in the region. We must take it seriously when a country like Iran threatens to close down one of these critical passages. And finally, we must maintain a favorable balance of influence that supports our long-term national interests. This list of interests that I've just talked with you about has not changed significantly for some time, and I do acknowledge that an argument can be made about the vitalness of each of these interests. With the possible exception of proliferation, I would agree that these interests are not existential to survival of the United States, but that does not mean they are not important. Failing to preserve any one of them would only make things more complicated and complex and potentially put our citizens at greater risk. That said, we cannot ignore that over the last several years, we have responded militarily and diplomatically in some manner to 4 of the interests, and the other, proliferation triggered a significant, lengthy, and largely unprecedented diplomatic effort. Interests and their priority and vitalness ought to be a significant factor for a future strategic approach for this region. For the purposes of discussion and argument this morning, I will consider the interests that I discussed today to fall into the category of important but not vital interests, meaning that our very survival as a country is not currently at risk. In the past few decades, our strategic approach to this region has been defined by preserving access to vital resources, containing Iraqi aggression, countering Iran's revolutionary approach, and by our concern for terrorism that emanates from this region and which ends up on our doorstep or the doorsteps of our close partners. All four of these remain important, but in my view, none of them should dominate our overall approach to the region. Our priorities should be focused on preserving an overall favorable balance of power in the region when compared against other great power competitors or would-be regional hegemons. As the Special Operations Command and later the CENTCOM commander, I was supported by a cadre of excellent policy advisors, POLADs as we refer to them. One of the things they often reminded me of was the foreign policy principle, as they referred to it, that allowing any single power to dominate this part of the world would be detrimental to our overall national security objectives. Many of our relationships and alliances were built around this fact. I think that this principle is still valid today, and it's not new in our approaches to the region. I often remind people that my first roommate at West Point came to the academy from Tehran American High School. His father was our defense attaché. This level of balance on both sides of the Arabian Gulf helped us until it didn't. Up until that time, we didn't have large deployment of troops on the ground. We didn't need them. Our balanced relationships on each side maintained a relative level of stability that served our interests. I'm also not suggesting that we orchestrate some type of kumbaya moment with the Iranians. I don't think this is particularly wise or even achievable right now. What it does mean is that the United States should pursue an overall strategic approach that makes or keeps us, depending upon your particular view, the preferred partner in the region, morally, diplomatically, economically, and militarily. Being the preferred partner will allow us an opportunity to preserve our important interests in the region while at the same time allowing us to shift necessary focus to address vital national security interests that are essential to our survival, like maintaining our competitive edge against China. And I think this can be done in a sustainable manner. Doing this will require that we also pursue some very specific actions that help solidify our influence. These could include the following: a relook at our security cooperation arrangements, both in terms of organization and execution of our military funding and sales programs. Our efforts must be backed up with an emphasis on responsiveness, professionalism, and self-reliance. In a region where we are the preferred partner, our security cooperation offices should be the main military effort, working closely through the country teams to implement programs for our partners and with our combatant commander to support theater campaign plans. To complement this, we must make our support conditional on commitment to military professionalism and sustained self-reliance. We should use our considerable experience in coalition warfighting to help our partners in the region achieve a better level of integration and unity among themselves. We should triple the amount of money we spend on international military education and training. This is IMET. This is a certain way to create a generation of regional leaders and their families who have an appreciation for our country. During my last year at CENTCOM, we spent just under $19 million on this program. In the big picture, it's not that expensive. But what we get from it is invaluable. We get officers that study in our schools and families that live in our communities. And if you don't think this matters, look at the most supportive and progressive defense chiefs across the region. Overwhelmingly, they have spent time in our schools. Their families had the experience of living in places like Leavenworth, Carlisle, Montgomery, Newport, and here in Washington, and have gained and taken away a positive view of our people and our nation. Look also at the countries where we have stepped these programs back. It is notable in their lack of understanding and appreciation of our country. We should review and update our access, basin, and overflight arrangements through the region with a view towards ensuring that they can support our ability to respond quickly and effectively in the event of a true emergency. We should routinely demonstrate our commitment to the region with deployment exercises focused on likely security scenarios. We should not forget the impact of exercises like Bright Star in the early 1980s that both demonstrated deterrence and commitment. There are clearly many other things that we can do and must do to solidify our influence, but I think you get the point behind this overarching idea and the high priority in my view. With this overarching idea now on the table, let me address a few of the ongoing and emerging areas and offer my assessment on where we are and where we may be going. Let me begin with our longest ongoing conflict in Afghanistan. I believe the President's strategy for Afghanistan is the right one. Focus on the reconciliation between the Afghan government and the Taliban. This is the only way that we will bring an end to the fighting and move this into a phase where we can begin to stabilize the situation in Afghanistan and indeed across the region. To this end, our military and diplomatic efforts need to remain focused on providing pressure on the Taliban and indeed on all parties to come to the table and make meaningful concessions in the interest of the Afghan people. If they perceive that we are not serious about this, we will have a hard time achieving our objectives. A full-court press by all elements of our national power will help the President's special envoy get this done. For the last year of my command, I observed closely and worked alongside our special envoy, and I assess his efforts are bringing us sometimes agonizingly slow and with frustrating road bumps towards the objective that we have been seeking. What is happening is not the result of desperation or a few meetings. It is part of a longer, more engaged approach to achieve our objectives. Going forward, we need to maintain a level of energy and patience that demonstrates to all parties that we remain serious and focused on achieving our objective. In the long term, we will need to preserve our interest of preventing this area from being used as a platform to attack our citizens, our homeland, and our friends and allies. This will likely mean that we will need to keep some amount of counterterrorism capability on the ground. Fortunately, the Afghan special operations partners we have are quite capable, and while we may not be at a point where we can outsource preserving this national interest to them, it will certainly allow us to do this in a more economical and sustainable manner. I also hope that stability in Afghanistan will provide us an opportunity to reestablish better linkages and ties in Pakistan. There is an important balance to be played between Afghanistan, Pakistan, and India, and staying engaged more broadly in Central and South Asia will benefit our long-term national interests, allow us to compete against other great powers, and hopefully prevent us from another situation which requires a massive, costly, and lengthy response. Let me now move to Syria. It goes without saying that the dynamics in northern Syria have changed rather significantly over the last several weeks. I assess the decision to retain some forces on the ground in north and east Syria following our pullback from the northern border is a prudent one given the new situation, and will allow us to maintain some level of partnership with the Syrian Democratic Forces and, importantly, stay focused on our campaign objective of defeating ISIS, and in the present case, preventing them from orchestrating a comeback. I fear, however, that our rather sharp policy decisions have come at the cost of the overall strategic leverage that we previously enjoyed following our liberation of the caliphate earlier this year. As we move forward, I think it will be important to clarify our objectives, and make it abundantly clear to all parties what our interests and expectations are at this point. We should attempt to remove all ambiguity about our position in Syria. This will be the very best way to de-escalate situations that may arise among the growing number of converging influencers in this area. We should also work with other regional influencers to limit and hopefully reverse the impact of the Turkish-led incursion. and address the continuing reports of atrocities and other humanitarian issues that are playing out today. Like all things in this region, we must use our remaining influence to move forward diplomatically toward a political settlement in Syria, hopefully through a UN-brokered process. I don't think that there is a better approach at this particular point, and as difficult as that has been, I think this is perhaps the best and only avenue available to us. We must also use our relationships to encourage a discussion between the Kurds and Turkey to de-escalate these current tensions. As difficult as this may be, it must be attempted. I remain guardedly confident that this could be done and should be attempted through relationships with Iraqi Kurds, who do enjoy a better relationship and open channels with the Turkish government. This is an underlying tension, and until it is addressed, it will be very difficult to move forward. It will also be important to keep our eye on ISIS, and our deconfliction channels with the Russian Federation will be vital to de-escalation and maintenance of this mission. If there's one thing we have learned about these terrorist organizations since 9/11, it is that they are resilient, and we must keep pressure on them until they are at a level that can be effectively managed by local forces. And I am hopeful that we will continue to stand by our Iraqi partners. The civil situation on the ground is not good right now, and our positive partnership with the Iraqi security forces is necessary to ensure they operate in a manner which best serves the people of Iraq. Maintaining our influence in Iraq since our reentry in 2014 has not become a rallying cry against us as it did before. We must continue this trusted partner behind-the-scenes approach. Our military efforts should be matched with an equally focused diplomatic and economic effort. Iraq, in my view, has always been a strategic linchpin, indeed, the crossroads of sectarianism in the region, and for us in this region. And if we compete, I do believe our interests can prevail. Recent events would suggest that Iran is not the preferred partner by the people of Iraq. This is an opportunity for us. Staying in the Levant, let me comment briefly on Lebanon. We all heard a dramatic rendition of the present situation by Nadine Labaki last evening, so I won't try to recreate that, but I will share a quick story with you. When I first became the CENTCOM Commanding General, I had a visit to my office in Tampa by a very senior Israeli officer, and we had an extensive discussion about the situation in the region, and especially about Iran and Hezbollah. He clearly viewed this as their principal threat. When I pressed him on ideas to deal with the situation, one of his responses not only struck me, but stuck with me. He told me, "The best thing you can do is double down on the Lebanese armed forces." I asked him to repeat that statement and then explain. He did, and his simple argument was this: the best way to undermine the nefarious influence of the Lebanese Hezbollah armed militias was to invest in the professionalism and capability of the Lebanese armed forces. An effective, apolitical, and well-respected Lebanese armed forces, or LAF, would be recognized by the people and would undermine Hezbollah's stated need for a militia. My experience supported this. Every time I visited Lebanon during my tour as the CENTCOM commander, which was 3 to 4 times a year, I saw progress in both professionalism, capability, and legitimacy in the eyes of the Lebanese population. I still think this is the case, and in the current turmoil of Lebanon that we are watching today, there is another opportunity to double down right now by showing our support for a professional LAF that is focused on protecting the people. Finally, let me talk about the Gulf and especially our challenges with Iran. I assess that the Iranian threat is a real one, that they are pursuing both through the use of proxies and through improved military capability that they have steadily built up over a number of years, and we must take it seriously. I do further assess that we need to defend our interests with military capability that demonstrates our resolve and which can hold Iran at risk. Like I have mentioned several times already, I think it is important to clearly articulate our objectives. We should attempt to remove all ambiguity here as well. I am not sure we understand what Iran wants, and I'm not sure they understand what we are after either. At the same time, we should also pursue channels for communication. I was deeply influenced by the effectiveness of the deconfliction channel, the military deconfliction channel that we had with the Russian Federation Armed Forces in Syria. And I am convinced that this channel helped us keep things in check and, more importantly, kept our forces safe and focused on the mission at hand, the defeat of ISIS. The big challenge in the Gulf, from my perspective, is always miscalculation. Clarity on objectives and an ability to communicate are the necessary ingredients to reduce miscalculation and begin to de-escalate the tension that currently exists. And it does not have to be elaborate. It could start mill to mill at lower levels, or it could even be done through a third party. Let me conclude my remarks here. My job this morning was to provide you a perspective on priorities in the region, as well as discuss some of the current hotspots and offer some suggestions that can begin to posture us towards paths to stability. I am under no illusion how difficult all of this will be to orchestrate. I also recognize that we are just scratching the surface on these issues. It is impossible to do justice to the region in a short period of time. Likewise, you may not agree with my assessment and conclusions, but I do believe it is possible to move forward, but it begins with making sure that we are absolutely clear about our interests and our objectives. I appreciate the opportunity to speak with you this morning and offer some thoughts that may influence the panel discussions that will follow. Thanks to all of you for your continued interest in this region and for your support to the Middle East Institute.